Alright, here we go. This is going to be really weird. I have never done a live stream before. I have no idea if this bloody thing is working or if... whatever. I'll just keep going. At least the Steam stream is going. Anyway, if any of you can hear me, I'm just going to keep going as if this is working. Brilliant. So anyway, yes, let's talk about some sword fighting. As you'll see, I've set up a character as a sword and buckler man. Give it a whirl. Haven't been on Exanima in quite a while. Interesting to mention they're having games with realistic sword fighting, but every time they try to start looking at such things, it looks like they start to go back and back and back until techniques start to kind of go somewhat out of the window, which is a bit of a shame. I know, of course, you've got to, well, being stylish and looking good, and of course being fun since it's a bloody game, but I think they sometimes are a bit, I'd say, scared of trying to commit because it's sort of uncharted territory. Oh well. Anyway, here's this guy, and he's got a long range weapon. Doesn't matter. Oof. Yes. He's using a quarterstaff wrong, suffice it to say. Normally you should be using the front end and back end. What you do is basically, you almost use it a bit like a paddle. Many of you guys have ever played the Dead Rising series, it's a bit like that. It's kind of, you bring the front end and the back end, left and right and left and right. Of course, it's a bit more nuanced than that. You'll be using sections to parry, sections to strike. You'd be deliberately switching between high and low. There'd be a couple of high attacks left and right, and then there'd be a high and a low kind of thing. First, we've got a giant pole just there. Using a two-handed weapon. One thing I mentioned was a bit of a bad thing about this game is that those sort of starting positions helps to be in a particular stance, because basically you can attack and defend fairly well without having to change as much. Oh, sorry for saying that. I'm getting distracted. There we go. In fact, let's switch up. There we go. All about that distance and timing. You can swing as hard as you like, but there we go, hit the air. What an idiot. Oh hello, you've got a shorter range weapon. Fine then, I'll just keep my distance. I say that just as she goes in. Really feeling... There we go. That's better. So have I been feeling... not doing very good at all. This is really shit compared to my usual. Of course I can't prove that without a good track record. This is my first time live streaming it. Obviously my pre-recorded stuff isn't going to show the absolute best of. Except that time I did learn swordsmanship while I play Exanima. But still. Oh, this one's gained a rank. So now I can add a new skill. Let's see what we can give it. Let's What's your usual style? Weapon and a shield. Anything good for shields? Yeah, continue attacking while receiving blows. That's a good one. Because that's what you should be doing anyway. Someone swings, they hit your shield, and then you cut them up. Let's pop in Rufus. Still. There we go. Here's my heavy hammer man. Against everybody. Oh, you're unoccupied. Frame rate dropping, but this will do. Ow! Yeah, I said horizontal swing. Mouse is counting double clicks again. God's sake. Oh, you didn't hear me say that. Yeah, I've got a... I don't know why, but maybe it's the way because I'm left-handed, but sometimes I click sort of on the edge of the mouse, and it ends up clicking sort of, well, counting as I have clicked, now I'm not, then I am, then I'm not. But while it's still held down, so it ends up making double clicks and stuff happen all over the place. Come on then. It really has been a long time since I last played this. Ugh. Come on, I can take both of you out. I should have enough leftover experience. Even after I've become shit. Gotcha! Ha 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 ha! Just a bit of beard power there. Slice people up. I already did a few videos recently about dual wielding, and despite my complaints about, well, not complaints, but recommendation that you should not use identical weapons, it just so happens that, as you saw, using this sort of combination of two cleavers is dangerous, but once you close the distance, boy is it nasty. Yeah. He's spot of trouble, I do believe. Out of measure. That was a good hit. Let me match that. There we go. Next fight. I hope you guys are entertained. Are you not entertained? That was awful. Basically punched. Exactly the most climactic finish, so there you go. Oh, he was going to try to swing out from there. Oh, there we are. Next fight. It's funny, some of the best techniques that you see when it comes to sword fighting are, I noticed, some of the simplest. So one of the ones I actually learnt recently, well, a couple actually, were things like what are called Swordfighting and H.E.M.A. Basically, do almost sort of helicopter movement. You swing around. Just trying to think of a way to explain it without demonstrating my hands. You basically sort of swing around on one side, rather than whirling your arms around to, let's say, swing instead of from the right, this time from the left. In a quick follow-up, you sort of just rotate using your wrists and just leverage your two-handed weapon, or even perhaps your one-handed weapon, and you deliberately use the back edge, so it makes for a shorter trip than swinging all the way around and using the same front edge. silly boy. Spears are for stabbing. You know, real life, someone with a spear really does get an advantage against someone who has a sword. People say, yeah, oh, you just cover and then close in, but it's really not that easy. Believe me, I've gone against people who are just slightly competent, or even people who just do sword fighting and aren't really used to spears. Random weapons tourney at a Swords and Cider event I went to. It's really tough. You can try to close the distance, but just a slight movement of the spearman's hands means they can move between aiming at your face, aiming at your legs, whilst you have to make some really severe movements. And of course, if you're going to try to close in, apart from the fact that they know in advance that that's what you're going to be trying, they also see it happening, so they really get plenty of reaction time to do something like move out of measure and keep the threat up, or stab you on the way in, or parry a boss, or do whatever. Because although you'd end up a lot of, you could easily capture the weak, the best, well, part of best leverage towards the head on a spear. If you start closing, they can try to push you offline and maybe do an exchange of thrusts, especially if you have a similarly long weapon. This idiot's not got a helmet. Oh! Shoulder guards. Let's take those. Can I have this? Cheers, Governor. Now, while I'm live, presumably, and you guys are here to hear me, presumably, here's one thing I'd like. I'd like you guys to make some more wishes. You know, there's a whole PC Genie granting wishes, but frankly, recently I've been having to do this whole wish granting thing and do topics requested by other people and other people's channels. I feel like I'm stealing customers. I've gone on to people like Scalagrim's videos. At one point, the most recent one was looking at using 2 shields, which requested on the Scholar Gladiatoria channel. I'm doing that because no one's asking anything. I did a 300 subscriber special where you guys could ask 300 questions and I'd answer them. In fact, I was hoping to do it on this stream, but I cannot see the comments lump that I put on. But at least if in general in comments and various places, I'll be checking thoroughly after I've done this stream. Apart from to check to see if it actually works. To try and get ideas for video. Because I mean, obviously I do historical European martial arts and I've used bows, slings, javelins, crossbows and trained in them. But I don't know exactly what the people want in terms of topics. Because I sometimes do topics I think are really interesting, but nobody watches. I do other things that I thought, oh yeah, you know, maybe someone will want to watch this, and it's really popular. So I'd rather actually put a lot of effort and attention to the things that you guys actually want me to talk about, you know? Let's face it, the reason I put these things up on YouTube is so that people watch them. So yeah, if I had a good idea of exactly what people want, I can focus a lot more attention onto delivering those topics, and if there's even more attention, I can make sure to do perhaps a longer video or a shorter video depending on the amount of attention, and perhaps do specials with things like the green screen and have clips inside with me maybe using certain weapons and styles or demonstrating what I'm talking about more perhaps. Or whether it's just going to be a quick topic, or it's going to be a quick topic and just have people, you know, see a bit of information on something interesting. And again, it helps to gauge that because there's all this stuff about analytics and whatnot, but I know that it's best just to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Literally just hear from you guys what you actually want to see. And as long as it's reasonable, you're not asking for, I don't know, porn or something, then, you know, I'll do it. a bit loath to talk about certain political topics because people just get angry, and I mean, I did a video recently saying, you know, we should just get along. Whoever you voted for, you know, just still be friends with people. Sure, everyone had their reasons for voting whatever political party. And this person once told me they voted in Donald Trump because they said that actually he was the only people who seemed direct enough. I personally don't like him, but you know, if someone feels so disillusioned with every other politician, they might well go for someone who seems a bit kind of conniving and evil, but at least is sort of more direct rather than hiding the shadows and trying to disguise about it. Again, you know, I'm not giving support or excusing anyone for whatever actions they do, but it means that sometimes people can be persuaded to vote for people who you may well believe are the wrong choice, and you might be right, but you know, doesn't mean that people who vote those ways are necessarily evil themselves. They might just be misled. I mean, how many times in history have people gotten trapped into some sort of dangerous situation by false promises? Quite a lot. Now, onto the topic of sword fighting. Yes, let's talk about shield. So, I mean, people tend to discuss about all here are the advantages and things, but let's talk about, without actually demonstrating, unless you guys want me to show this in a video. I'm not the best when it comes to sword and shield, and sort, you know, stuff like sword and buckler. There's really anything that requires using 2 items, but I know a few of the core techniques and basics. So, when it comes to using a shield, if you're doing something like Highland Broadsword, you've got something that protects your hand. It turns out, I learned recently, that you can stick your hand further forward. So you can deliberately have, say, your Taj or shield on your chest, just as sort of armour on there, and then... oh, gotcha. And then stick your hand forwards, and you can tempt your opponent to hit you in an area that's uncovered, do stuff like that. And then you can move your shield out to cover maybe what the opponent's doing. But for the most part, if you're talking about arming swords, maces, anything that doesn't have complex hilts that definitely keep your hands and arms safe, then you must always keep the weapon behind your shield. Whether you're doing something like keeping your arming sword, for example, retracted back on your shoulder or something like that, or whether you're doing something like actually keeping the weapon tight next to your shield. A bit like what you see represented in Roman fighting, which is actually fairly realistic, where you have the sword pointed forward, ready to strike, but your hand is just behind the shield, and you've got the sword pointing forward, so you can close in and jab and do whatever. But what matters is, you're keeping yourself fairly safe while you're doing the attacks. Because although people show in the media and whatnot, it's all this about stabbing people in the belly and splitting skulls open, especially if people have got armour on their bodies, they won't necessarily have very well protected hands and arms. And sometimes you can, you know, not necessarily kill them in a dramatic sense, but just disable them and stop them from fighting and take them out of action, just by carving their hands up until they just give up or drop their weapon. And it is a genuine concern whenever using something like an arming sword or a two-handed sword that doesn't have that proper hand protection. You might well have maybe padded gloves, mail gauntlets, or even plated gauntlets, but normally, for good flexibility, there we go, good flexibility and protection, actually you'd normally see I'm forgetting already. There we go. Better protection here. No, that's embarrassing. I've forgotten my subject of conversation. Oh yes! Using shields. So yeah, even with plate armor, one of the things that people get wrong quite a bit is imagining that it's always the same sort of thickness. So someone will say, this, like a longbow arrow, can pierce plate armor, or this longbow arrow cannot pierce plate armor. Really, stuff like gauntlets, normally a lot thinner, so they're with plated protection for, obviously, ways to make sure that it's not completely vulnerable and exposed in the first place, but it's going to be pretty thin, whereas something like a helmet is going to be the thickest and strongest protection. So hence, the same weapon, like for example if you're sticking your hands in front of a shield, going back to what I was talking about, you could maybe have a weapon that, like a bow arrow, that will pierce through some gauntlets reasonably well. But if you shoot them in the helmet, assuming it doesn't go into the eye slots or under into the neck or something, then actually it won't go through that plate. So you can have something, you can easily have weapons that do go through plate armor on areas like maybe the feet and the hands, the thinnest plates, but just will not go through something like a helmet. And people are too black and white about it. Like I say, they imagine that all armour is the same thickness, the same protection throughout. Another thing to bear in mind when it comes to superiority of weapons, like using things like swords or arrows, is the fact that people can be killed within plate armour, usually because of the gaps. So let's say I'm wearing a helmet, especially something like an Anglo-Saxon helmet, maybe it's so thick, you know what, doesn't matter what you use, you're not killing the underneath. So what do? You don't deliberately hit the plates and try to damage it, no. You go, okay, I'm gonna stab you in the face through those eye sockets. And then it's very much like there's no armour there at all, because actually, on those gaps you're aiming for, simply there is no armour. So hence, it's better for that sort of thing. Yes, it is. Let's see which is. Bastard. So might do better. Next. Oh, clash. Oh yeah. Something that happens in real life a lot actually as well. Sometimes you see heroes represented as maybe being run through with a sword and they'll get angry, and then later on they go haha, or maybe someone who's on the floor in pain and then they'll suddenly get a dagger and stab someone. But in real life there were a lot of cases where people would hit each other at the same time or very shortly afterwards, and it's one of the silly things about, you know, in things like Game of Thrones, they always say, oh, stick 'em with the pointy end. But if you do focus so wholeheartedly on sticking your opponent with the pointy end of a sword or a spear, what will often happen is, by focusing so much on offense, yeah, maybe you've done a sport fences thing and got the first hit, point to you, but really, you're going to get hit in a process. And it could well be that maybe you make the first hit and carve someone's legs open. Oh man, that's going to be an artery hit, you know. Ooh, better, bandage that up, or they're going to die of bleeding out. But then, that person delivers back with a skull-splitting action. So actually, although they've hit you afterwards, they've, in a way, done one better. And it's never good to trade hits, even if, you know, especially if you're going to be in a battle or something. You shouldn't really be doing things like trading skull splits for hand carves or something. Because if you need to keep fighting, that injury is going to smart and not going to be good at all. So it's best if you actually just minorly injure your opponent, and that counts as a casualty for your enemy's side, and you're perfectly fine. That's actually better than having someone killed and you injured. Plus, if you are in something like a less economically developed country, or we're talking historically, maybe the wound treatment won't be in time, or just isn't of a good enough quality that wounds can fester, and maybe you'll have permanent injuries like broken bones that never mend properly, or perhaps bleeding wounds that were, you know, bandaged up but actually get infected later on and you die that way, which is probably even nastier than just bleeding out quickly. So it's worth bearing in mind that Matt Easton's favourite word is, of course, context, isn't it? You know, you've got to consider what the implications are of doing something like hitting someone. And also where you're hitting. Like with this person here, she's got a helmet on, but that bit around her elbows is quite unprotected. It's just, might be mail armour underneath that coat, but might just be padding or maybe just ordinary clothing. If I strike them in the face, you'd say, oh, headshot, woohoo, that's good, but in this case, oh, actually I've got a mace, so it's alright for the helmet, but really I want to be trying to smash maybe those feet up or legs. Depends. My apologies. Yeah, covering with her strikes. Notice how she sticks the shield in front. Obviously this is a game, so it won't be shown a full technique, it's just, you know, it's physics-based combat, but it gives the right idea. You've got that shield, you're pointed in front of you, even if you stretch your arms out, so you don't actually put your arm as a bend and have the shield out flat. It actually helps to stretch your arm out forward, and that strapped shield is going in front of you, and maybe it is keeping the right-hand side exposed, but you can parry with your weapon, or bend that arm to keep the shield in if someone attacks you from your offside, well, from your weapon side. So it's best actually to cover over, maybe start with those arms retracted back, weapon on your shoulder, and then arm bent at a right angle so your fist is pointing up, and then you've got that shield back, and then when you're attacking you can cover over by stretching your arm out forward, and then stretching that, then of course you can extend the weapon hand forward at the same time, so then you've got a covered strike. So yeah, that's how you use a shield. So if you ever see people using shields in a manner of doing things like, I've got my shield, I put it in front of me a few times, and then when I'm attacking, I pull the shield back, I start swinging forward with the weapon. It probably means I'm an idiot with the shield. What you really should be doing is keeping that shield either right next to the weapon or covering an angle. So that's pretty much the two main ways of attacking. So you either are, maybe especially sword and buckler, you have the weapon and shield hand next to each other. So then maybe I'm attacking someone's head, I punch out with that shield to add a cover, and then I extend out with my sword arm to make a cut. The other way is to do something like maybe I raise a larger shield up to cover my head, and then I sweep down to cut the legs. But in both situations, I've still got that shield actively used to do some sort of cover, whether it's covering the same angle I'm attacking in what I'd call tight shield action, or whether you're covering a different angle to cover one side and attack the other. But if you just pull the shield back, then you might as well not even be holding it. In fact, it's worse. If you're using something like a saber or a rapier, you'll notice, or maybe not, I'll tell you anyway, you might notice that people have their body sideways on, they'll have their leg forward, and they basically have got that maximum reach of the weapon. If you've got a shield, you're not putting one shoulder in front of the other when you're attacking, you're normally just having them level with each other, ready to have the shield out. So hence you actually, if one person's using an arming sword on its own, of the same size and shape, and then someone else has that arming sword as a shield, you'll notice even if they're of the same height, the person who's using the arming sword on their own actually gets a little bit more range and reach, because they're doing a passing step forward. So they're, let's say I'm right-handed, I step my right foot forward and I make that cut, then I maybe retract back into another position, pull a leg back again to get into safety. Whereas with something like a shield, I can do things like passing footwork or shuffle footwork, but I'm trying to keep the shoulders fairly level so that I can keep my shield in front of me and have a bit of coverage. In fact, you don't really see that saber style footwork with these weapons. Even if someone's using a single-handed weapon on their own, they're always fairly shoulder level of each other. Let's get into the next fight. So here, watch my character now in the red. You'll see he's got usually his left foot instead of in front of his right foot, but his shoulders are equal of each other. And you'll see it's quite easy for his hands to be next to each other. And that's really often how a shield would be used. At least from what I see. Maybe I'm wrong, and someone who does historical European martial arts focusing more on stuff like sword and buckle correct me, sorry. But from what I see, normally it's best to actually have the shoulders level with each other. You got the shield able to cover, to do a covered strike, and then be able to execute strikes, swings, stabs, all of that lovely stuff. Like here, I'm going to do a covered stab. He actually, for all the perks of taking in shields, the the guy I've got, does pull his shield back a bit when the stab is being done, which isn't good, and I do often suffer for it. But at least in the initial stage, there it is, right to that beginning part, he does it perfectly. That's basically what you should be doing in real life. Point that shield forward, thrust out, and it's covered. Next to either that or have the shield up or down covering another angle to cover one angle and strike at another. Who shall I fight with next? You know what? Let's Alt Tab. Whoa, what am I doing? I am checking for... Oh, here we are. What if you're wearing a gauntlet with a medieval arming sword? There we are. I'm going to actually look at what you guys are saying. That's the only way to do it so far. Right. If someone is using a gauntlet with a medieval arming sword, to be honest, still the same applies. Like I said earlier, something like a gauntlet, it does protect, but rarely, unless you've got something that's far too thick and it's not really going to allow you to move much at all, and it wouldn't realistically be used, therefore, you've still got the same vulnerability. Plus, there are often gaps. To allow articulation, there are often sort of hinges and gaps. They try their best to cover over, and you can get some incredibly well-designed and well-engineered gauntlets, but there are always going to be some vulnerabilities. I mean, I actually had someone... There was this thing where I was doing foam fighting, you know, just with a two-handed sword, and I was with someone else, but the reason I had to cut the footage short, and just at the very end you hear the whoa, whoa, whoa kind of thing going on, is actually because someone got stabbed. I know that, well, it's a swordfighting club, of course people are going to get stabbed, but what I mean is, this guy, I won't say their names, but one person's fighting against another, they were using their gauntlets and they had steel training weapons, so this was blunt, bearing in mind, it wasn't even sharp, but one person had their gauntlets on, good protective gloves. But what happened was, one person was executing a cut, the person who got injured, and the person who caused the injury was doing a thrust. What happened was, the thrust caught under the gauntlet, so it was under the protective part, basically hit the palm of the hand, a bit close to the wrist, around where the joint was. And it meant that they, even with the blunt sword, they took quite a serious injury, and they actually had to go to hospital for it. It wasn't something that was devastating and they're going to be, you know, you're wondering if they're going to use their hand again. There was still a noticeable injury that needed proper treatment. And luckily we had someone in our club who actually is with the NHS. That's National Health Service to you Americans, basically hospitals. And so it was okay that, you know, nothing bad happened to the guy, poor person, but it just goes to show that this person was wearing gauntlets, but they still took a serious injury because you can't protect the palms without just wrecking the handling. By the time you've done that, you know, you've protected the inner palm, maybe of padding and or plates. By the time you've done that, basically you can't use your hand anymore, and it's like you've got a person who's sitting duck, you know, they can't use their hands properly and articulate, so thus they can't attack and parry. You just, at that point you can just, you know, treat them like they're a statue. You just poke around them and do whatever you want, so they're useless as a fighter. Hence, with any realistic gauntlets, I'd say you still can't really put your hands in front of you, ever. It's safer, and you won't, you know, you won't get your hand cut off if you split the sword, maybe, but it's still dangerous. So hence, if you look at things like, what's it called? Gross Messer, well, Messer, which is German for knife, big knife, or things like Falchion, or even arming sword on their own treatises, like what I've seen from Fiore's works. You always see, regardless of the context, self-defense, dueling, warfare, the person always starts with their hands behind them. It might be in a position called guarded lady, which is where you've got, it's a bit like you wielding a baseball bat. You've got the arm on the shoulder, left shoulder or right shoulder, regardless of what handedness you are. You might have it in a window, so it's up level with their head, and the sword point is pointing forwards towards the opponent, but the hand is still back. Or even you've got stuff like long tail, which is where well, it speaks for itself, it's a bit like you've got a tail. You have your hand level with your hip, and you have the sword's point trailing behind you. So positions like that are where you've actually got the sword behind you. You only ever put the sword in front if you're doing something like a bind. Let's say my opponent executes a cut, maybe they want to chop my head off. So I bring my sword forward to clash with their sword and, you know, make sure I don't get my head cut off. And then when that happens, I then decide to do something else, like disengage and attack from a different angle, or maybe I go and actually push their sword out of the way and then stab them in the face, which is called the exchange of thrusts. But by that point, the difference is when an opponent's sword is bound with yours, whether using a two-handed weapon or a one-handed weapon, or actually even of non-swords, if your weapons are bound together, then basically what happens is you've got control of the sword. If the opponent's trying to push you out of the way, maybe trying to disengage, wherever they are, if they're on the strong or the weak, you can feel where they are. In fact, I remember in our club we even did exercises where we actually had people closing their eyes. Actually, I think it was sort of one-on-one sort of exercises I did with someone from my club, but it was, point being, I closed my eyes, and I've done this with other people before, get them to close their eyes, and when the sword's bound, you don't need them to look at the sword, and they can tell you, yes, that person is trying to push me out of the way, or maybe that person's not touching as hard, they're probably going to disengage, they're going to come off and hit me from a different angle. And you can feel where their sword is on your sword, where their weapon is on yours. So that's okay. In that situation, you know where the weapon is, you have some idea of what they're going to do, so it's safe to have your hands forward. So maybe, indeed, it's nice to have gauntlets so that maybe they don't slide down and, past the quillons and cut your hand open or something. But apart from that situation where it's bound, you're still taking severe risks by having the hands forward. There we go. Let's punch this guy up. That's interesting. When it comes to unarmed combat with the medieval treatises, at least from what I'm seeing from things like Fiore de la Berry's treatises, there are a lot of similarities to certain styles. You've got throws, hip throws, leg throws, and things like that, which are seen, in medieval times. No inspiration, as far as we know, from Chinese or Japanese styles, but it's mostly focusing on wrestling. So, grapples, throws, disarms, and takedowns. There are plenty of strikes as well, don't get me wrong. You've got, you'd imagine, punches, you've got sort of an interesting one I found in Fiore Streets. One of my favourites, I call it the Fiore push, is where you actually have the hand open, you know, like you're waving to say stop, or even maybe I suppose you could curl the fingers back as well. But you use the palm of your hand and you push up at the opponent's chin. Either do it just as a basic pushing motion, or you could easily. There's nothing in a treatise saying you can't do it as a strike, a palm strike. And then when the person's chin is back, you then they sort of start. Their back usually starts arching and they start staggering back. And then by that point, whichever leg is forward, you can use the other hand to grab that, and you basically pull them over. And it definitely works. I find it difficult because often when you're getting a person, of course, they'll try to, especially if they know what you're doing, you know, they'll push at your forearm or your elbow to take it offline. But basically, sorry, I'm digressing yet again, but the point is, when you see strikes being used in medieval treatises, the feeling I get from them is that they're not the strikes in and of themselves. It's not like boxing, where you think, okay, I'm going to deliver a jab, then a couple of crosses, if that doesn't work I'll then do an uppercut to the chin, and then they're knocked down. What seems to be happening is the logic that I'm understanding from it at least, is that you deliver maybe a few crosses and a jab or something and an uppercut, and what you're thinking is, okay, I soften them up, and then my goal is to wrestle with them and take them down to the ground. And bearing in mind, I haven't really seen much or anything in terms of groundwork. So although there are certain martial arts, especially when you're doing mixed martial arts, that have, of course, you know, groundwork, so what to do, like shrimping and all of that, when someone's got you on the ground. Excuse me. But it seems in the medieval times there's a lot of assumptions that people have often got access to weapons, be it maybe improvised items like batons or sickles or clubs, or even indeed just carrying things like knives. I think there were certain areas that actually had laws against carrying proper swords and weapons around on the streets, but unlike today, I mean in Britain at least, there are laws where basically any knife or anything that's over 3 inches long, you've got to have an extremely valid reason and have a lot of proof that you've got a genuine reason to do so, or you're a criminal. Whereas, it seems that you could just carry knives and daggers around freely in a medieval period. Again, I'm not 100% sure, but that's what seems to be the case. Oh, sorry about the lack of lighting on this level. No, it's not the recording. You can't blame YouTube. I myself can hardly see a bloody thing. I'm just hearing and seeing shadows moving. But yes, as I was saying. So, I think one of the reasons why there's not much groundwork is because people would have weapons. You know, there'd be people using maybe even just stuff like chairs or knives that they've got. So, by the time you're on the ground, be it by a long weapon like a sword or a spear, or even just by some improvised weapon like an eating knife, you're probably buggered. Not necessarily guaranteed. Of course, there are ways you could maybe still get the upper hand on the floor, but the general assumption is when you're on the floor, that's it. There we go. Slammed their head if you didn't see. Silly idiot didn't wear a helmet. I don't think this one is. Oh wait, she's wearing a padded cap. Anyway. Yes, it's interesting. I think unarmed is a good ground, you know, groundwork, a good base, let's call it, a good grounding, a good base for other things like armed martial arts. Because if you're good with certain items like swords and spears and whatnot, it's good, you know, it's certainly useful. But when it comes to dueling and self-defense purposes, not so much on a battlefield, unarmed combat is always useful. If you close in with something like even a spear or a two-handed sword, then having unarmed combat expertise actually means you have a good advantage when you get close up. And I've actually you know, fought in sparring matches against people who are good at close combat. Their general tactic is I have to keep them at range, and you know, I predict that they're going to try to close in, so I do counter tactics to maybe stab them in the face on the way in, or cover and, you know, go offline and cut them up that way. Whereas their strategy is, of course, they'll want to try and cover in with maybe a parry, or just deliberately binding of my weapon. And then, of course, once they do that, they can go around, and a lot of the stuff you might see in judo, taekwondo, that sort of stuff, where you maybe do a hip throw, leg throw, you can either drop your weapon and switch to full, dedicated, unarmed, or you can just take one hand off your weapon, two-handed or one-handed weapon, and maybe still have a cover going, like say I put my sword in the way of theirs, and then use your other hand to swoop around and maybe do something like a shoulder throw, hip throw, you know, those kinds of things. So hence, having unarmed combat expertise helps a lot when it comes to fighting, you know, in weapon combat. Generally though, it's used less and less the longer the weapon, so you're very unlikely to need it if you've got something like a spear. It just goes without saying, you know, even if you are using a spear, you should have something like a dagger or a sword if someone's getting a bit too close for comfort. But then we look at the opposite extreme. I've looked at, I've seen a little bit, and I haven't had, you know, I wouldn't say I'm good enough to fully interpret all of the stuff in the German manuscripts and whatnot, but certainly from at least in Fiore della Berri's Italian treatises, dagger fighting is almost identical to unarmed fighting. Difference is, you're looking at threats, so of course, rather than something like a punch and maybe someone says, you know, or decides I can take a punch, with a dagger, you of course have to determine that the dagger is the immediate threat. But if someone's, say, got the dagger still in the sheath, if the person's actually grabbing onto your jumper, or, you know, that's sweater if you're American, your tunic if you're medieval, someone's grabbing onto your clothing and sort of threatening you, but they're not really, you know, they haven't got their dagger out, they're just kind of, it's maybe behind them, more relaxed, then maybe you can just use all the same unarmed stuff, wrist locks, arm bars, throws, that kind of stuff. But once they've got the knife or dagger out, he says dagger, the knife or dagger out, that's when you have to say, you know, that's the threat. So even if a person is grabbing onto your clothing, or they're, for example, they're actually just threatening you with the point, and their other hand is completely away, you have to make sure to counter the threat of the knife first and foremost. So usually what that involves is, well, the obvious choice at first is run the hell away. With daggers, usually someone is going to die. It's not like maybe a sword, you get your hands cut, maybe people, you know, people decide, right, I've had enough, been hit with a mace, oh, got a concussion. With a knife, that's why I, in this game, call anyone using a knife a dagger bastard, because someone will die. The person who's defending or the person who's attacking just needs to fully commit to killing that person. And one of the things that Fiore says is there's no well, it was something along the lines of there's no defense against a dagger. The way I interpret it is there's no parry against a dagger. You can't, it's not like in some video games where someone cuts with a knife and then you can parry, or someone stabs with a knife and you can block it with your sword. Either they're out of measure, so, you know, it doesn't matter if they swing or stab, they're not getting you, you're safe, or they're in range, and it doesn't matter if you've got a sword, you need to actually properly cover, not the weapon itself necessarily, best thing to do is to cover their hands. So let's say someone tries to do a horror movie stab at me from above, I shouldn't be focusing necessarily on the dagger, because I might get my hands cut up, I might miss. What I should be doing is maybe trying to, if I cross my arms, or block with one arm at a right angle, or even grab out of my hand, stretch out, I want to get their arm instead. And then once you've got control of the person's hand, you can maybe bring out a knife of your own and stab them instead, or you can maybe disarm the dagger by twisting it out of their grip, do some unarmed stuff. Maybe once, another thing you can do is, for example, you've got control of the dagger hand, so you know, okay, I've stopped the attack, I've grabbed their wrist, they can't stab me anymore. So then you proceed to do normal unarmed stuff, like a throw. You know, maybe I've grabbed their arm, and then I bring my other arm, it's not defending, around their shoulders, bring my leg behind their knee, throw them onto the floor, because I'm okay now, I'm safe, I've controlled their hands. And make sure, of course, to keep hold all the way to the floor, and perhaps ideally even still keep hold when they're on the floor. Try to take the dagger away from the board, just let go when they're down and run the hell away. Just interesting, it shows that actually when you're looking at those styles of unarms, the reason why maybe in stuff like Krav Maga it looks so similar, people fighting with knives or daggers and fighting without, is actually because the sort of bodily control systems, grapples, throws, disarms and takedowns, they're all basically the same. It's just, of course, when you add a weapon, you've got that added element of, I need to control this deadly item. And I imagine I haven't read anything dedicated to disarming guns, but at least from my martial arts experience, I would imagine that controlling something like a pistol or a rifle is pretty much the same thing. You're making sure not just to focus on things like strikes and parries anymore, you're wanting to control the opponent. Keep the barrel of that gun away from you, and either, once you've controlled the weapon, either take it from them with a disarm, or follow up with some kind of unarmed fancy takedown or armbar, or you know, something that breaks one of their limbs or does something. Maybe even you could have that grab going on with the knife or gun, and then at that point you can start, you know, punching the living daylights out of them, or doing some kind of karate style chop and just try to flatten their windpipe. You know, there are lots of things to do, and you should never have a martial artist tell you there are only a few things you can do. One of the core problems with being a martial artist is that there are so many things a person can do. Even if you've trained, let's say, to stop a punch, there'll be someone who's going to just grab you and throw you to the floor. Or if you're used to someone who's kicking, same thing again. There are people who do chops, there are people who do the hammer fist stuff, there are people who are going to be wrestling you from the torso, maybe trying to go all strong arm and launch you onto the ground. Maybe there's someone who just wants to do something simpler and take your legs out. You know, the number of things you can do is quite limitless, really. So one of the key problems I find is, no matter how much you train, you know, where you become confident and good, even in sparring where it's all chaotic and not a drill, against someone doing X, Y, and Z, there's going to be someone else who's got an idea to do something else instead. Even with stuff like basic sword strikes, often people just do stuff like what I'd call a fendente, which is doing an overhead strike or a diagonal strike from the right, if they're right-handed, and just because it's the easiest, you can get the most power into there. But there are people who do the same kind of fendente from the left if they're right-handed, or you know, the right if they're left-handed. So they're taking the opposite angle, you need to watch out for that. Or maybe they'll do a mizani, as we call it, which is a sort of middle strike, if I'm trying to cleave you in twain around your hips, sort of thing, or, you know, take your legs out from under you. Or maybe what's called a sotani, which is doing a sort of upsweep, starting from below and cutting upwards, maybe up to their chin, or up from their hips to their shoulder kind of line. In fact, there are also differences that happen when people attack with the true edge and the false edge. There's stuff called a H.E.M.A, which is where you use a two-handed sword and you cut in, but rather than using the front edge, you actually do a almost, it will feel awkward kind of movement, where you actually swing in with the back edge. And the way that the swords will clash and bind actually means that what could be a successful parry often ends up being actually the person who did that H.E.M.A at you and you parried in the normal way, they've still got a line, so maybe they turn the wrist and cut up at your head, or they just bring you offline and stab you in the face. And something like a Swordfighting, a cut from under. You could be using the front edge, so you're kind of doing it a bit like in the movies, you bring the front edge forward, using your fists, knuckles forward, and just do that sort of cut. Or you could sweep up with the back edge instead. One of my favourite positions from Fiore's treatises is called Boar's Tooth. If you, it's going to be, I did a video about the stances if you want a proper look, but imagine, start off, you've got a two-handed sword, both hands are straight in front of you, and you're pointing a sword out in a line. Bring your hands back so that your fists are level with your hips on the left if you're right-handed. Excuse me, so the opposite side to your normal handedness. And then you drop the point towards the floor, so it's a good resting position. You're kind of there, it looks casual, you don't have to raise it up and strain yourself too much. You're just there, you can have the point dragging on the floor or just raised above, nice and relaxed. And then it's good to deliver out, lunge out with a thrust, or do something like some kind of cut with the front edge, but it's very nicely primed to do a false edge cut, because of course with the point being down towards the floor, your front edge is probably pointing diagonally towards your foot, and then the back edge is pointing towards your opponent. So with one simple movement, no whirling around like a clumsy idiot, just one quick movement, swap, and you've got them. You can cut up somewhere like their legs, torso, or around somewhere like their neck. Another thing that's worth mentioning that sometimes people didn't know is that when you are fighting, some of the stances and positions that you see represented in manuals are not just starting positions, but they're actually where you can end up midway or in stages. One example is, I could end up in this sort of, what's called iron door or boar's tooth that I mentioned earlier, similar-ish kind of stances. If, let's say, my opponent tries to stab me, he goes, "Hi-yah!" and lunges forward with that two-handed sword. So I then go, "Oh no you don't," and do a beat. I swing down and I beat his sword to the floor. It'll turn out I'll be in a position like that boar's tooth I mentioned earlier. I've bound with his sword, it's on the floor, and then what I could do is maybe I step my foot onto that sword, so then I go, I'm stepping onto my opponent's sword, oh, he can't move it anymore, it's bound, and then when I've done that, I free up my sword from that same boar's tooth position to do a Swordfighting, that upsweep, with the back edge, and slice their neck open. Results may vary. Obviously there's no such thing as a foolproof plan, but that's just one example of something you can do. So it can sound, when martial artists are describing it, it can sound really complicated. You think, come on, nobody can do that in a real fight. You've got this, what, you've got like a falcon, and then what's this? You say you've got a punte, and then he's doing like a beat and a boar's tooth and a Swordfighting. I mean, listen to all of that, that's going to take so many steps. Who could do that in real life? But really, what happens, you simplify it to, he tries to stab me, I hit the sword to the floor, I step on that sword, and then slice up and cut his neck open. Pretty simple. Obviously there are sometimes some techniques that martial artists describe that do start to get really complex and a bit kind of unrealistic, let's be honest. But a lot of the times, what these people are really doing is they're trying to take something that is in concept simple, but you know, if you try to tell a beginner how to do what I just described to you, just go, okay, so beat the sword down and cut up the neck. They'll try, and they'll be there going, okay, how do I do that then? I don't understand. So, you break it down into steps. Okay, so I start here in Falcon, my sword is above my head, look at this. Oh look, and there's this guy, go on, do a thrust at me. Person does a thrust, I then do a beat. Look what I'm doing, I'm hitting the sword down to the ground. Use that force, put some manly effort into it. Okay boss. So, I then think, okay, they're bound, my sword's on his, stopping it from going up and cutting me again. Oh yeah, I see that. I decide, but I want to use that sword again, I don't want to keep it on the bad guy's sword forever. So, what can I do? I'm going to step on that sword. Oh yeah. And then I cut up. With this, look how my back edge is closer to them than the front edge. Oh yes, so if I do this front edge, I demonstrate the front edge. Look how long it takes me to turn the sword and then cut. But what if I do this instead? And then I show the false edge. Oh, my first defeat. I do the back edge cut and slice the neck open. And then I'll see, oh yeah. Okay, well, everyone's tuned out. Tell you what, I'll end it for there. Tell me what you guys thought of the live stream. I'll obviously archive it and publish it later, and I can of course have a listen, see how well it went. But see you guys later, and again, in the comments, just or at any time in a discussion on my channel or in a message, just tell me whatever things you want me to cover, and I'll see if I can help you out. Obviously within reason, you know, medieval combat, projectile weapons, fighting, that kind of stuff. And have fun. Alright, see you guys later. Look at how amateur I am.